think about feedback and how our thinking is running into problems. Then we will, in the second half, share with you a different kind of understanding of feedback that departs quite substantially from the traditional view. We will describe how it looks like, and then we will engage you in some exercise and give you a little taste of how it is when you experience the feedback in a different way. So I am Tomas. I am sitting in Prague, and we have here quite a range of people. Feedback is really a hot topic because it's not only in organization, but it as well in our other relationships. Any social group we might find ourselves in is doing feedback, and we are somehow doing that when we are consciously giving feedback, but we are giving feedback even when we are not doing anything. When we are silent, it's often feedback too. So we are engaging in feedback in everything we do, and that makes it kind of difficult to talk about because it's pervasive, it's all over the place, but in the same time we sometimes we need to be very specific and do something. So I will start share a slide deck with you, so to give you a little bit of our thinking about feedback as it currently is growing. So what we would like to do is to have to attempt deconstruction of feedback. And why is that? Is that feedback comes from a technical domain, and the most common way to imagine this is this image of thermostat in your living room that is giving feedback to the heating system and saying more heat or less heat needed. This very mechanistic understanding of feedback is unfortunately not very good image for what's going on between people. Such an image has led to a very mechanistic views about feedback, suggesting that if we give feedback well, if we send the signal clearly, it will have the expected result. It will have the impact we are expecting on the other person. And we all know that's not the case. So no matter how hard we try to send feedback according to the rules of feedback, it's often quite unpredictable. So there are several ideas that can help us in this situation. Perhaps the most important one is something that is called switch track or switch tracking, which is this situation where somebody gives you feedback and your reaction to that feedback is a feedback back that changes the subject. We have all experienced this, and sometimes when we give negative feedback and we get response that is focusing on how we gave that negative feedback, saying, you know, you are giving me feedback, but I give you feedback on how you are giving me feedback. And that is switching the focus of the feedback. Now, one of the good things to observe is how we often feel justified in doing that, or how the other person feels justified. And we are often not realizing that it is actually strategy that is predominantly a defense, often subconscious, but something that creates a lot of division and polarity. So there are some things that can be improved about feedback, and our ability to recognize, for example, switch tracking is something that helps us to navigate feedback better. So there is a lot to learn about feedback. The other thing is the emotional response. You know, we all have experienced that this emotional roller coaster when you are given feedback and then you feel the pain and the anger, rejection, and so on, and then you kind of accept all that. All that is actually not very helpful, because notice one thing here: both the switch track problem and the emotional response problem is something that is including the person who is receiving feedback, which is completely at odds with the original image of that feedback loop from the mechanical engineering. This original understanding of feedback, which is very mechanistic, doesn't even consider the other person. And now we have talked about switch tracking and emotional response, which is actually about the other person. So when we are trying to fix the common issues with feedback, we are already bumping against the very assumptions about feedback, which is it is very mechanistic, and if you do it right, it will have the right effect. Well, it won't, because these assumptions are something to be carefully examined. So this feedback we are trying to do seems to be a dialogical process, something that is happening as we are giving feedback. It's something that is forming, but being formed in the same time, something that is created by both parties and can be improved only by being very self-aware and being able to create some kind of clear understanding of what's going in the interplay between people. So what we are talking about is this different definition of feedback that is not about unidirectional sending and
creating something that is created in the process. So it's a paradoxical process of forming and being formed. It is both relational and social, and it depends on awareness of both parties.
What is going on is that in our feedback practice, we are trying to shift from giving information about past behavior to a mutual exploration of perspectives on the situation. Letting go of assumption of I am right or I know what is more appropriate, and engaging in exploration of how the other person makes meaning. So we are actually getting behind this assumption that is common for good feedback and bad feedback. We all know what so-called destructive feedback looks like. It's this very harsh criticism that is putting people down, that we call it destructive. Now, people say, let's make the feedback more constructive. But the problem is that there is something that is common to those two types of feedback, and that is both assume that the feedback giver knows better. There is this big assumption behind that is common to the destructive and constructive feedback. I, as a feedback giver, know better than you, feedback receiver. So there is this very unobserved assumption that we would like to question and start to replace by some other ways. So what we are proposing is something that is that we call deconstructive feedback. It might not be the final name for that, but it's a different feedback that starts with curiosity. it's not something that starts with I know. It's something that is focused on learning. It respects the choices of the other person. The other person makes but wants to explore why. This is, I think, very important point, because it comes all the way back to Aristotle, that said, you know, there are no negative negative motivations. Every person does what he or she thinks is the best thing to do in the very situation for him or her. And we are not really paying attention to that. We are not realizing that whatever we see people do, we need to understand that this is the best they think they can do in that situation. And this understanding completely shifts the feedback assumptions. In modern times, when you look at nonviolent communication practice, you as well see this understanding that people are expressing their needs in a way that might not be transparent for the need, but there is something positive behind every action. So we need to respect that, and rather than criticizing the visible behavior, we need to look at what's behind that. And in order, the way to do that is to engage in dialogue. And the dialogue needs to be not about what happened, not about the behavior, but we think that it is much more fruitful to go between the area where the person makes meaning about how to behave. So we are creating a dialogue or discussion about not what happened, but about how the person thought about what to do. Why did he use this kind of response? How that response makes sense for him? How that response is actually appropriate from his point of view? What are the things he considered? What are the things that influenced him in that decision-making process that led to something that might not be as we would do it originally or in that situation? So these are the three major departures from the usual way of doing feedback. When we put it in the table, we arrived at this basic two kinds of feedback distinctions, where the basic stance is going from I am right into I don't know, no perfect answer. We respect ourselves and each other. I change the purpose. I'm not trying to change the other person, but I am trying to figure out why did it happen? What can we learn from what is happening? I am focusing on something else. I am not focusing anymore on behavior, but I am focusing on how the other person makes sense. And this point is really important, because when you give feedback to somebody and you focus on behavior, you are likely to have minimal impact, because the person will remember only in your objection for that particular situation. But if he gets to a different situation that is similar, his meaning making will kick in, and he will do the same thing again. Now, when you are focusing on how the person makes sense of the situation, and you are able to change that, you are able to impact that person much more deeply, and for the future situations as well. So we are having this two kinds of feedback front of us, and we are realizing that the deconstructive feedback is really different because it is using different assumptions, it is using different focus, and it is using different techniques of how to give feedback. So what we would like to do is look at how we can actually start working together to learn how to give such a feedback. So let's try that in a small exercise. We will split you in groups, and the instruction is very simple. In each group, I'd like to have a volunteer, person A, who is a storyteller. Person A tells a personal story with some emotional charge or difficult decision. Person B will be the rest of the group. Everybody else who is not telling the story is person B, is active listener. A tells a story and B is active listener. And what we would like to practice here is a different kind of listening and engaging in the dialogue with the person. And there are two simple rules. You are not allowed to give advice, and you are not going to refer to your own experience. Everybody who is in the group can try to inquire further in the story being told. That's it. No advice, no our own experience. Just inquire into the story. Try to figure out how the person thinks about what is going on. How did it go? Just give us some sense of how easy or difficult was it to ask those questions without giving advice or referring to your own experience.
For me, it was difficult not to go into the empathetic, oh, I hear you, especially with technical difficulties. But I really had to, bite my tongue on trying to give that empathy instead of being curious.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a good reminder for me to add another rule to that. Don't give empathy, because that's exactly what you were supposed not to do. Thank you for adding that to yourself. Exactly. So how did it work for you to, what helped you to be curious?
Is this a general question or to somebody in particular?
It's general. Anybody?
I think I'm just naturally curious, but I thought it was interesting that that Maud pointed out one of my curious questions was actually disguised as advice. It's kind of an unconscious thing. So maybe Maud could even recreate it somehow, because I would love actually to be more clear about what I did, if you remember.
Thank you, Peter, for the grace of your openness to that. What I remember was you asking something like, have you tried to da-da-da-da-da-da? That's what I remember. Maybe Miriam, you remember it.
Yeah, it was about how did I try and share the burden of how to include others in my control system, and if I tried that.
Yeah. So that's very common trap, that we are asking question that is actually hiding some kind of obvious advice, and if we are able to go beyond that, what this exercise is trying to do is to give us a glimpse to how to start inquiring about how the other person makes meaning about things. What is the decision-making process of the other person? And that is very different kind of thinking or questioning and dialogue than what we are usually used to do with people. We are focusing on content. We are focusing on behaviors, something that is very tangible. But in order to shift behaviors, we need to focus somewhere else than on behavior. We need to focus on what is creating the behavior, and that is how we make meaning of the situation, how we understand what is going on in that very moment. And this exercise is the first step in that direction. Any other insight or thing that you have noticed in this?
I think what I often do is to form hypotheses about what's going on.
Right.
So it's a kind of curiosity, I suppose, but it's I found it interesting to really try and not make any hypotheses and just asking questions instead, because it's a more open way to explore.
Right. There is even technique for that called clean language, but I think clean language as such is not. I think it's not enough. What we are trying to do here is going even further. Is really trying to figure out how the person has thought about that situation and why did he or she do what they did. So that's something that is very unnatural way of engaging. And when we were thinking about deconstructive feedback, we found that this kind of questioning, this kind of curiosity, is actually the best way to start a conversation about what happened. Because what we see is what happened, and that's done. It's something that we can't do much with anymore. But what we can do is the shift how people think about situation and help them for the future. So what we would like to do now is to model two types of feedback. One, constructive, the traditional way feedback is given with all the rules followed, constructive feedback, and then hopefully engage in a conversation that will be deconstructive feedback. And I will ask Megan to give me feedback and play a role of somebody who I used to work with. This is a real story that happened to me something like 6 years ago, maybe more, 7 now, where I was part of a larger organization. I was running a Prague office of that organization, and I had various duties. I was running the office, I was doing all the consulting work, but I was as well supposed to do the business development and marketing. And on that front, I was supported by a colleague, let's call her Rachel, who was at the headquarters and was supposed to help me with marketing in Prague. But to be honest, she was not very helpful. Every time I needed something, it was a problem. She either didn't have time or didn't know how to do that. We always run into problem with specifics of Czech market, not even Czech language. For example, the Czech diacritics didn't show on the mass mailings, and there were so many embarrassments. And every time I wanted something that I found really easy and obvious to ask, such as, let's have a link in a mass mailing, she made a scene of it. So it didn't work. It's impossible. So I was more and more frustrated. And at some point, I actually burst into a quite emotional yelling at her, and it was done over Skype. I was shouting at her over Skype. She got upset and switched me off. Now, about 10 minutes after that incident, my older colleague calls me, who happens to be the boss of of Rachel, my colleague, and gave me a feedback. So can I ask Megan to give me that feedback, please?
Okay. Thomas, how you've treated Rachel is completely unacceptable. You cannot upset a colleague in that way. I think if you have a problem, you should be addressing it with her in a way in which is more productive, and you need to find a solution together without an angry outburst. It's not the way we do things around here, and actually I think if this was to happen again, we should have a serious conversation about how we work together in the future.
Bad, isn't it? Now, why is it so awkward? The thing is, I have not learned anything from Megan at this moment. I knew everything she told me. I knew I was out of line. I knew I should do it more constructively. I knew it might have consequences for our future work. I just didn't learn anything at all. And it was so awkward because the person who was telling me this knew as well. They knew they are not telling me anything I wouldn't know. They actually knew that I am on occasion teaching feedback. So, I mean, I'm doing communication for other people. So why wouldn't I not know that shouting at somebody over Skype is not a good thing? You know, I don't need to be told that. So this incident was actually at the root of my start of thinking, what's wrong with this feedback? What's wrong with this traditional way of giving feedback to each other? There is something that just doesn't fit. It's not right. So Rachel, Megan, can you do it differently, please?
I can try.
This didn't help me.
Okay, so Thomas, I've just got off the phone with Rachel, who was very upset, and she told me that you shouted on the phone to her so much so that she switched the camera off of the phone call. It seems to me it's probably not the way in which I would have done things, but I'm interested to find out more about your experience and how it escalated to such a point.
Well, yeah, I must tell you, she was not the only one who was upset about this call, because it really didn't go well. I can tell you that you're right. It didn't go well.
And what happened from your perspective to provoke you to get to a place where you felt like you needed to shout?
Well, I really felt helpless, because the way we are trying to work together is leaving me with very little chance to actually fulfill my role. And I am in a position where I am feeling I will fail in what I'm supposed to do. And she is just really not able to help me to overcome that. And in fact, it seems like she's not only trying, but she's actually hindering whatever I am trying to do. So yeah, I feel helpless.
And in that conversation, were you able to explore both of your perspectives on the situation?
Not really, not really, and that might be the problem, because she seems to be really not interested in what I have, what is my goals, and I am feeling like I'm feeling like she is really responsible only to the headquarters tasks, and I am just this bother on the side, so I feel like a victim here. Good. So thank you. So how does this look different? How does it feel different? What's your reaction to these two different kinds of feedback?
Well, to me, the first one was basically the manager defending her employee with really with the intention to punish you.
Discipline, yeah.
Discipline, and at the end actually threaten your survival. Although it's, you know, I mean, it causes that level of reaction. Your survival here is at risk. So it's just totally a way to create shutdown. The other approach was really asking your side of the story, asking for your perspective, which is like there's a willingness to understand. Or there's an opportunity for you to be seen and heard.
Okay. What else was in the way Megan was asking me? What else was there?
Well, there was also, I heard about, was there an opportunity for both of you to tell your point of view or say what was up for you? I heard that. So the question was, were each of you kind of on a equal footing in a place of open dialogue? That's what I understood the question.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments to what when you heard these two types of feedback side by side?
So I would say the first version was a hierarchy of power, when somebody from up is talking to somebody down. He's not really interested to hear or listen or understand what the other point of view is. So it was just hierarchy of power thing. The second, I would say, tends a bit more in the direction of a hierarchy of competence, and was tending more in a communication which valued the feedback and was asking more for feedback. Also, it was still right from the beginning only focusing on the worst part of the communication, also the being angry from the side of the opponent.
Yeah, but
so one option would have been, for example, to just mention that somebody has called, Rachel has called, and what do you think why, and then open the door and let's talk. Then that would be even more open to experience what was going on both sides. So that
but Frank, I think you have mentioned an important bit, because how we understand deconstructive feedback is not shying away from being very clear about differences in opinion. So Megan was saying very clearly, this is not how I would have liked to solve the situation. This is not how I imagine it should be. You know,
exactly, that's what you knew all along also.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that there is any need to actually deny that clarity or just to shy away from that difference. I think the difference can be expressed the same way. It's just, it needs to be followed and I'm curious why we are not coming to the same conclusion.
And being open to a new conclusion being created.
So it's not about compromising or some diluting your own stance or your own values in that situation. I think in deconstructive feedback, you are even freer to actually express exactly, this is how I think things should be. And I'm wondering why they are not like that for you. And I can see that you did it differently. And I'm wondering, how did it happen? What was causing, or how things developed so that you ended up shouting at her?
Oh, I think I had a misunderstanding.
Cecilia,
So
sorry.
that
Cecilia,
I had a
you are
misunderstanding.
mute. Yes.
Oh, okay. So which one is the first? Peter, if you want to say something. No, not Peter. He was Frank from Germany. So I think, you know, giving feedback might lead to conflict. However skilled you are, however trained you are, we have different needs, we have different perspectives, and also we have different personality types and way of communication. And giving feedback, mainly if you are based in a different setting and in another part of the world, and when you don't have maybe regular contact to discuss things, might lead to conflict. And actually, I think that having this kind of normal, you know, like accepting the feedback, however it is, it's very much linked to conflict mediation or nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
Because it was something like, you know, anger. It's normal that we are angry sometimes. It's our right to be angry. It's our right to be nervous. It's our right to express our feelings. The problem is how we do it. And in certain circumstances, things can explode. And this should also be normal. You know, we should not expect that we can control all the time, everywhere, our feelings. And I think that in this situation, what happened, it was like this sudden explosion of emotions, and which happens, and it can be a normal, let's say, conflict. But as you know, as you showed, the second approach was an approach which should be done, or how it should be done, you know, by people who are involved, or by an outsider who is coming into this conflict. So this was my opinion about this. And of course, I worked the majority of my life in hierarchical organizations where everything was about power and egos and positions. So having this type of feedback, it was almost non-existent.
Yeah.
And it really takes a lot of time for people to train themselves to reach that level, to be able to look at a conflict and to give proper feedback. And also, giving proper feedback is culturally biased. You know, I'm also coming from a very, let's say, aggressive culture. I'm from East Europe. I'm from Hungary and Romania. The way how our parents communicated, it wasn't on constructive feedback giving. So we inherited this way of communication, and even for me, if I look at myself, how I communicated 10 years ago compared to how I communicate now, it's a completely different world.
Yeah.
And
right, there is something about the development of us, allowing us to be more deconstructive and more curious without putting our opinion forward as we go older and hopefully wiser a little bit. I'm noticing that we are 5 minutes past the time, so I'd like to get this to close. We are at the very beginning of experiencing or experimenting with deconstructive feedback. It is something that we have tried with several organizations, something that we are practicing with each other. And what we are finding is that it is a quite unnatural way of inquiring and quite natural way of talking to other people. And I'd like to encourage you to start practicing this kind of asking question, not in the feedback first, but in any regular situations. Start to be curious about why the person is saying what that person is saying. How are the perspectives taken? What the person is actually thinking about when she is or he is saying that. So, and start asking these questions to other people around you. And when you do, you start having very different kind of conversations, much deeper in impact. And later, maybe we will be able to use it in chart situations like feedback. So thank you very much for spending the hour with us. At the very end, any insight you would like to share with others? I can see quite important ones in the chat, but if there is something you would like to say, this is the time to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to say just the word humility. I think this is a practice, because if you are humble enough to see that your point of view is not the only one and just one perspective, that allows you to really be curious. I guess that's the word that emerged for me, to practice humility.
And I think it's also the coaching method. So if you are doing coaching with other people, questioning is a method what you also need to apply. And also I found this approach also in the human-centered design thinking, where you put the person in the center of your whole project and developing a program or project that it's based on their own perspective, their own needs, and how they actually perceive their own reality and what.
What I learned tonight was that this practice is opens a possibility to look at feedback as a practice for cultivating connection beyond the very thing we're discussing and through it. And also for learning, so seeing it as a way to grow. And I'm very touched by that. So thank you, Thomas. And thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.